Good morning, grandkids. We are ready for another reading of The Listener, and this is going to be chapter 10 and 11. This is after the listener has left the cabin where she first saw Astrid up on her shelf. Oh, I wanted to show you that I'm wearing my Inigo t-shirt. I haven't worn it for a long time. Okay, these two chapters are going to be mostly traveling chapters, trying to get from that cabin in the swamp to Falkreath. I looked around at the swampy landscape. As far as I could see, it was gray and colorless. Trees were twisted and raggedy. Grasses were dried, and bushes were mostly wads of sticks. White mist was slinking and hovering over most of the visible ground and waterways. The very air was gray and tasted salty. There were death bells and nightshades growing in abundance. This biome must be great for them. They thrive so heartily. I knew I'd be gathering plenty of them as I traveled through this area, great for making killing potions. I walked a few steps to the edge of the first winding canal, where a boat was pulled up half out of the briny water. I wondered if it was what Astrid used to bring me here. Nah, I couldn't see her paddling through this place. This had probably been abandoned along with the cabin long ago. It was probably rotted and leaking. Besides, I'd never use it to get myself out of here. What did I know about navigating through these twisty, turning, interconnected waterways and canals? I didn't even know which way to start walking. Across the narrow strip of salt and ice clogged water was a ring of stones. Some kind of ritual or sacrificial stones, maybe? Far beyond that, barely visible in the gray mist, was a mountain range. I decided to head that way. I figured if I turned a little to my left ever so often, in a while I would eventually come to Morthal. Other than the poisonous plants, it was a colorless world. I had to get in the water, and some of the ice formed large slabs that you could walk on, but most of it was mushy, and your feet would slip through. I was pretty much wet to my waist by the time I made it over to those tall stones. They seemed to have been standing there forever, and being part of some long ago ritual, it looked like, buried in the ancient past. A good place for ghosts and necromancers. Moving on, I kept a wary eye out. There were tall pine trees, dead and drooping, old, gnarly, twisted roots of old stumps sticking up in the air like spiders on their backs, dead and rotting. Speaking of which, I was suddenly hit by a projectile of sticky goo. I whipped out my bow as I turned in that direction. There was a massive spider with two of its buddies. I fired at the one in front, causing it to hesitate as I took out one of its sidekicks. I fired again at the leader and sent him to his death. The third seemed to take notice that things weren't going so well and actually started to lumber off. I killed him anyway. You know, I give no mercy. I looked over the spiders with their legs drawn up in death spasm and collected their venom. I continued on like this through the gloom, the spiders and the mud crabs for the rest of the day. Yes, there were mud crabs, not little normal mud crabs. These of the swamp were huge, with massive claws and pincers. Let me tell you, if you didn't move away fast enough, they hurt you. As the light began to fade, I could see a few stars peeking through the mist. I was feeling the need for rest, so decided to stop for a while, not knowing how much farther I'd have to travel. I managed to scrape together a small fire and hoped it'd be enough to keep the critters away. I didn't intend to linger here for long. You know, I must point out here, cooked crab meat isn't half bad. I finally packed up and went on through the night. I was anxious to leave this mysterious place behind. I did meet up with one mangy wolf, which looked hungry and probably was hoping I was going to be his next meal. He was an easy kill, and I left his skinny carcass where it dropped. Eventually, in the wee hours of morning, I glimpsed a couple of rooftops through the dead trees and foggy vapor. Just as the sun came into view, ready to burn off some of the creeping fog, I stepped onto the end of a stone bridge into Morthal. No one was stirring yet, and the town was quiet. There were only a couple of guards about on their morning patrol. I tried to ask about finding an inn, but they shrugged me off, all important and busy. Yeah, right. I realized there wasn't much to this place, but I easily spied the Moorside Inn. They were just getting ready for business for the day. They welcomed me in a sleepy, unenthusiastic way, and I ordered some food and rented a room so I could get some rest in a real bed. After I ate, I went to my room and crashed until the sun was high in the sky. I decided I had traveled on foot long enough and started inquiring about a stable or a carriage. The town was too small to have either one, but one kind soul said he'd take me as far as Rorikstead, as he had to make a delivery there. So I just as well ride along. I thanked him kindly for his courtesy and gave him a few coin, and we were off. I'm sitting here in his cart trying to write this all down, which isn't easy with the cart bouncing up and down over every hole and rut. So if you see lots of squiggles and messes, don't blame me, blame the cart. Chapter 11. The cart driver rolled into Rorikstead after dark and dropped me off at the Frost Fruit Inn. Wow, there was nothing here. This inn and maybe 2 or 3 farms. I went inside and back in the back to the bar. I paid for a room for the night and 2 bottles of mead. I took them over to the open fire and sat down on a bench. After the cold and foggy time spent up in the marshlands, it felt good to be farther south and now sitting by a nice warm fire. The mead wasn't bad either. Of course, as soon as I sat down, like everyone in Skyrim seemed eager to do when they saw a stranger, a rough-looking farmer sitting nearby started running his mouth. He introduced himself as Limkill, and then proceeded to tell me all the bad things that he could think of about his daughters. I remembered overhearing a similar conversation way back in my past. Why does he think I care? I took my mead and myself to my room and wished I could shut the door, but there wasn't one. The next morning I had breakfast, thinking to get an early start down the road. It was still a long way to Falkreath, which was my next stop in my search for the Dark Brotherhood Sanctuary and and Miss Shelf Ornament's so-called family. But before I could get 2 steps down the road, there was a young farmer in my face, telling me his complaints. Of course there was. He introduced himself as Eric and started telling me his troubles as I stood there, staring with probably a bewildered look on my face. His problem was that he wanted to be an adventurer like me, but his father wouldn't let him. He said he would love to follow along with me. He would even carry my burdens. I rolled my eyes, told him that he was a grown man and could do as he pleased. Then his face looked bewildered. I edged myself around him and took off at a run down the road until my energy was flagging. I slowed down and started paying attention to my surroundings. There was a lot of wildlife and more of those twisted, raggedy-looking trees like the ones up in the swamp. Beautiful, hazy mountains far in the distance across the vast tundra. I wanted to roam those mountains someday. Also, make my way all the way north to the sea. That would be a place to see. Someday. Dream on, I thought. An assassin will probably never get there. I walked a long time, stopping once to eat a bite and drink some water. Of course, needless to say, there were wolves, skeevers, big cats, and so on that traveled with me. That's too common to hardly mention anymore. It was almost evening, and the sky was turning a pale pink and orange in the hazy blue sky with soft streaks of white clouds. I was really tired by now, and I think my feet hurt. I wasn't sure. They might be numb. As far as I had come from Rorikstead, I would still notice someone passing me, traveling back the way I had come from. I wanted to let them know that nothing was there, and the handful of people were trouble. But I didn't want to be like everyone else in Skyrim, rattling off at the mouth to a stranger. I let them be and let them travel on to their folly. There was a stump near a 2-way split in the road, and I gave up and plopped myself down on it. I must have sat there for an hour or more. It was getting dark, and a few stars were popping out. I heard rumbling wheels in the distance, and finally there was a carriage coming down the road that slanted up to the left of me. He slowed to make the sharp turn onto the road that slanted up to the right of me. There he stopped. He hopped down and walked back to me. I had my hand on my dagger just in case. As he approached, he said, "Hey, aren't you the woman I took to the Windhelm before?" Sure enough, he was the same driver from Whiterun. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Whiterun or Falkreath?" I told him Falkreath, and he said, "Hop in. I'll give you a lift on into town." I gladly hopped, or limped, in. "Here, have a mead," he offered. I accepted it gladly. He chatted a little, telling me why he was so far from Whiterun stables. He had been prepaid to return to pick up someone he had brought to Falkreath yesterday and take them back to Whiterun. He was silent after that. Wow, I thought, he wasn't like the rest of the people in Skyrim. A couple of times we chatted, shared another mead. I wondered what was happening here. I needed to rein myself in. This chatty business could get out of hand. This was not me, and I was totally out of my comfort zone. If I wasn't careful, I'd wind up letting the wrong person get too close. Or what? Make a friend? Holy crap, I wouldn't know how to handle a friend, or what to do with one. I shut my trap the rest of the way in. Near the gate, I thanked him for the lift and scrambled out of the wagon as he tipped his head, clucked to the horses, and rumbled on through the gate. I lingered outside, keeping clear of Khajiit and his lady. No more conversations. When the driver and his fare came back out the gate and headed up the road, I slipped inside, rented a room, a drink, some food, and settled down with this journal. I must say, this has all been a new experience for me, and an uncomfortable one. In the morning, I'll find that sanctuary, accept Astrid's offer, and be glad to be around my own kind of people. I'm an assassin, not looking for a friend. Next, someone will want to give me a dog. And that's the end of those 2 chapters. So I hope you enjoyed that. And in the next chapter, I'm assuming we will be at or discovering the sanctuary. So I will see you all later, grandkids, and I won't see you again before Christmas. I'll see you after Christmas, probably Monday. So all of you have a great Christmas and a coming up Happy New Year. So bye-bye for now, grandkids.